December 5th, 1872. Okay, picture this. A ship, just adrift,
Yeah.
out there the vast Atlantic east of the Azores.
Yeah.
Sails kind of weird, no one around. It sounds like fiction, but this was real. This was the Mary Celeste when they found her.
It's an incredible image, isn't it? And for this deep dive, we've pulled together some really interesting sources to try and, figure out what might have happened.
What have we got?
We've got articles from Smithsonian Magazine, Chicago Public Library, some fascinating threads on Reddit's Ask Historians, which can be surprisingly insightful.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Then there's info on Conan Doyle's connection from Visit Portsmouth, some modern science angles from UCL News, maritime perspectives via Martide and Marine Insight, and a history hit for a good historical grounding. So quite a mix.
That's a great range. Okay, so the basics.
Huh.
The Mary Celeste, sailing from New York, November 7th, 1872, headed for Genoa, Italy.
Right, carrying industrial alcohol.
And on board, Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their little girl Sophia, just 2 years old, and a crew of 7.
Yeah.
10 people in total?
And then they vanished.
Exactly. So our mission today really is to sift through all the theories, all the evidence, and try to land on the most likely reasons why. We're looking for those key insights, the bits that make sense, not just endless speculation.
Let's start right at that moment of discovery. The ship that found her was the Dei Gratia.
And this is wild. The captains, Morehouse of the Dei Gratia and Briggs of the Mary Celeste, they were friends. They'd actually had dinner together just before setting sail.
Yeah, talk about a shock for Captain Morehouse. So his crew sees the Mary Celeste sailing, well, erratically.
How so?
The sails were partly set, maybe some furled, but there was a torn topmast sail just flapping. It wasn't sailing with purpose. And when they hailed her, nothing. Silence.
So naturally they had to board her.
Right. They sent a boarding party over. And what they found was eerie. The ship itself, seaworthy, but just empty.
No people at all.
None. And the lifeboat was gone. That's crucial. We'll definitely come back to that.
Okay, lifeboat missing. What else?
One of the pumps looked like it had been taken apart. There was water in the hold, about 3.5 feet.
Is that a lot? Enough to sink it?
It sounds like a lot, but no, not nearly enough to sink a ship like that. It was manageable.
Okay, manageable amount of water, disassembled pump. What about the cargo? The alcohol?
The cargo. Well, left 1,701 barrels, mostly industrial alcohol, like you said. Now, here's an interesting detail. 9 of those barrels were empty.
9 empty out of over 1,700.
Yep. And importantly, those 9 were made of red oak. The rest were white oak.
And the difference is?
Red oak is more porous. It breathes more than white oak. So those 9 barrels were much more likely to have lead alcohol vapor.
Okay, leaking vapor. Could be significant. But still, where were the people?
That's the million-dollar question. They found a 6-month supply of food and water completely untouched. So it doesn't look like they were starving or anything.
Right. It suggests it wasn't a long, drawn-out ordeal.
Exactly. And the crew's belongings, their personal effects, were still in their quarters. Like they just left suddenly without packing.
Any clues from the navigation side? Charts, logs?
Well, some accounts say charts were scattered about. Others mention the plates used for navigation were secured, as if they were expecting rough weather. Bit conflicting there.
Okay. What about the ship's log?
The last entry was dated November 25th. But here's a real puzzle. The position recorded in that log entry. It was roughly 600 miles away from where the Dei Gratia actually found the ship just 10 days later.
600 miles. That's a huge discrepancy.
Massive. And initially, no obvious signs of a fight, no signs of fire, but crucially, the ship's papers were gone. Sextant, chronometer, the important navigation tools also missing, along with that lifeboat.
Okay, so missing lifeboat, missing papers, missing instruments, missing people. But intact cargo and belongings? It's weird.
Deeply weird. And theories started flying immediately, of course. Piracy was an early one.
But you said the cargo was intact.
Exactly. Pirates want loot. Why live valuable alcohol and personal items? It just doesn't add up.
Okay, so piracy seems unlikely. What else? Mutiny.
Also considered. But Captain Briggs had a good reputation, respected, fair. There wasn't any clear sign of struggle or conflict on board. There was a later theory about some German crewmen, the Lorenzen brothers, maybe stealing things, but a descendant clarified that any missing stuff was actually lost in an earlier shipwreck they'd survived. So that theory kind of fizzled out.
Right. So the more standard explanations didn't quite fit the facts.
Which naturally led to more imaginative ideas. Sea monsters, alien abductions.
The usual suspects when things get mysterious.
You know it. Part of the legend for sure, but absolutely zero evidence. Waterspouts were also floated as an idea. Maybe one spooked them into the lifeboat.
But the ship wasn't heavily damaged, was it?
No, relatively intact, so a catastrophic waterspout seems less likely to.
This is where things get really interesting, because fiction starts to play a huge role, right? Arthur Conan Doyle.
Oh, absolutely. The creator of Sherlock Holmes himself. In 1884, he wrote a story purely fictional called J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement.
And it was based on the Mary Celeste.
Loosely based, but he took massive liberties. He called the ship the Mary Celeste. That spelling error stuck for ages. He changed the dates, the route, invented this whole dramatic, vengeful ex-slave character, and a totally different violent ending.
So completely made up.
Totally. But it was a gripping story, and it caught on. A lot of the sensational details people think they know about the Mary Celeste, like maybe finding warm meals on the table or whatever, they actually come from Doyle's story or later embellishments, not the real event.
Wow. So fiction really did muddy the waters, didn't it?
A good time. Then you had the official investigation, the salvage hearing, led by Attorney General Solly Flood.
And he wasn't buying the simple abandonment story.
Not really. He was quite suspicious of the Dei Gratia crew, thought maybe they had something to do with it, maybe foul play for the salvage money.
Did he find anything?
He pointed to some cuts on the ship's bow, but those were later dismissed as not really conclusive. He even speculated about cleanup bloodstains, which also turned out to be false.
So suspicions, but no hard evidence against the Dei Gratia crew.
None that held up. But the fact they got a lower salvage reward than usual. It does suggest the authorities still had some lingering questions, even if they couldn't prove anything.
Okay, let's move towards more scientific explanations then. Right. What about the cargo itself, the alcohol?
Right, the alcohol explosion theory. This one's been around a while. The basic idea is that vapors leaked from those barrels, maybe those porous red oak ones we mentioned.
And then something ignited them.
Potentially. Maybe heat built up, maybe a spark could cause a sudden flash, a bang, enough to panic the crew into abandoning ship. But initially, people were skeptical.
Why?
Because the main hatch was found secured, and the boarding party didn't report smelling strong alcohol fumes. And there were no scorch marks, no signs of fire damage.
Okay. Seemed like a dead end.
Until modern science took another look. There was this really cool experiment done by Dr. Andrea Sella at University College London relatively recently.
What did they do?
They built a replica of the ship's hold and used butane gas, which behaves similarly to alcohol vapor in this context, to simulate an explosion.
And the results?
Fascinating. They got what's called a pressure wave explosion. So a big bang, a burst of flame. But, and this is key, the air behind the flame front stayed relatively cool, and crucially, it left no soot, no scorch marks.
Wow. So it could have happened without leaving the usual signs of fire.
Exactly. An explosion like that could absolutely blow open hatches, make a terrifying noise, create a big flash of flame, enough to convince Captain Briggs that the ship was about to blow sky high, even if it wasn't actually burning in the traditional sense.
And prompt a very rapid decision to get off the ship.
Precisely. Especially if it happened suddenly. They estimated maybe 300 gallons of leaked alcohol could have been enough. Maybe sparks from shifting barrels set it off, or even someone careless with a pipe. It fits the lack of physical damage.
That's actually a very plausible mechanism. But there's another angle, too, isn't there, involving navigation and the ship's condition. Anne McGregor's work.
Yes. Anne McGregor did a really thorough reinvestigation, bringing modern maritime knowledge and some newly found documents to bear, a fresh look.
What did she focus on?
She worked with an oceanographer, Phil Richardson. They looked closely at markings found on the ship's log slate, sort of a rough notebook, and compared them with historical weather data. They figured out the ship's likely drift pattern. Richardson basically concluded the Mary Celeste could have sailed itself from its last known log position to where the Dei Gratia found it, just carried by wind and currents.
Okay, so the 600-mile gap isn't impossible for an uncrewed ship.
Apparently not. But the why they abandoned ship is still the question. McGregor's research points heavily towards a navigational problem.
The chronometer.
Yes. The ship's chronometer, used to figure out longitude, was likely faulty. McGregor argues Briggs probably thought he was about 120 miles east of his actual position.
120 miles. What does that mean in practical terms?
It means he would have expected to sight land the Azores about 3 days before he actually would have, based on his calculations. Imagine sailing, expecting land, and it just doesn't appear day after day.
That would be incredibly unnerving for a captain, especially with his family on board.
Definitely. And adding to that, Solly Flood's own notes mention Briggs changed course the day before he thought he'd reach the Azores. He headed north of Santa Maria Island. Why? Possibly looking for shelter.
The shelter from what?
Rough weather. The data shows they likely encountered strong winds and high seas the night before that final log entry.
Okay, so bad weather approaching,
Yeah.
and he thinks he's lost, or at least significantly off course.
Exactly. Now add one more potential problem. The pumps.
The one they found disassembled? What about them?
Well, remember the Mary Celeste had carried coal on a previous voyage, and it had recently been refitted.
Yeah.
McGregor suggests coal dust from the old cargo, plus maybe debris from the refit, could have clogged the bilge pumps.
Ah, so if a pump wasn't working.
Briggs wouldn't know how much water was really in the hold. Remember, it was packed tight with those alcohol barrels. He couldn't just look down and see the water level easily.
So he might have feared the ship was taking on a lot more water than it actually was because he couldn't pump it to check.
Precisely. So let's put it all together. You're Captain Briggs. You're hitting rough weather. You realize your navigation is way off. You should have seen land days ago, but haven't. And you can't be sure if your ship is holding up because your pumps might be fouled. You think you might be close to the Azores, maybe even within sight if the weather cleared.
Taking to the lifeboat might suddenly seem like the most rational, safest option, even if the ship looks okay on the surface.
It becomes a calculated risk, doesn't it? A terrible choice to have to make. Get the family and crew into the lifeboat, try to reach the islands you believe are nearby.
And the missing lifeboat points directly to that decision.
It does. They likely took it, aiming for Santa Maria or another island in the Azores.
But they never made it.
Sadly, no. In the rough seas they were experiencing, a small, open lifeboat would have been incredibly vulnerable, capsized, swamped, overwhelmed by the elements. That seems the most probable fate.
So it wasn't one single dramatic thing like pirates or sea monsters. It was a cascade of problems.
A tragic combination, it seems. Faulty instrument leading to navigational error, bad weather rolling in, uncertainty about the ship's integrity due to the pump issue, leading to a captain's decision made under immense pressure with bad information to abandon ship. A decision that, tragically, doomed them all.
It's a much more understandable story, in a way, though no less tragic. And the Mary Celeste isn't alone in this kind of mystery, is it? The whole ghost ship idea is pretty common in maritime lore.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
You've got ships like the SS Baikamo abandoned in the Arctic ice in the 1930s, but spotted drifting for decades afterwards. Incredible story.
Wow, decades.
Yeah. Then there's the Octavius, supposedly found frozen solid near Greenland, with the captain still at his desk. Logbook open from years earlier, though. That one's likely more legend than fact.
And the Flying Dutchman, of course. The ultimate ghost ship legend.
The ultimate legend, doomed to sail forever. But there are real documented cases, too, like the Carol A. Deering, found wrecked and deserted off North Carolina in 1921, or the Joyita, found adrift in the South Pacific in 1955, also missing its crew and passengers. Mysteries remain.
What about the HMS Resolute? Wasn't that found empty, too?
It was, yeah. Abandoned in the Arctic ice, found later by an American whaler. But unlike the others, it was recovered, refitted, and eventually returned to Britain. Parts of its timbers were famously used to make the Resolute desk, used by presidents in the Oval Office, so sometimes they do come back.
These stories really capture the imagination, don't they? The sea is this vast, mysterious place where things and people can just disappear.
I absolutely do. And the Mary Celeste remains probably the most famous, the archetypal ghost ship enigma. But I think the modern understanding, this convergence of factors, human error, technology failing, nature's power, feels like the most, well, logical explanation, even if we'll never know the exact sequence, the exact final moments.
It really underscores how applying new knowledge, new techniques, can shed light on old mysteries. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Oh, so?
Well, think about other historical puzzles, events that seem totally inexplicable. How many of them might just be waiting for a similar kind of re-examination? Using modern science, digging into overlooked documents, questioning old assumptions. What other ghosts might actually have very real, very human, if complicated, stories behind them?